Hey everybody, I have what I think to be a pretty cool budget modern build. Slightly budget anyway. If you've ever had a bunch of bulk rares that you thought that, hey, these are kind of cool, but they're not too relevant, maybe something will come out in the future and make this a thing, that's exactly what I believe has happened. With Amonkhet, we have the mechanic of a lot of -1 counters, and two big payoff cards with Hepatra and Nest of Scarabs that are token generation for creating -1 counters. Now, this was also a big mechanic during Shadowmoor and a lot of other, sets in that block and that time period. There wasn't a huge modern competitive potential deck that came out of that previous block, and I also don't think that there's a huge competitive -1 counters deck in Amonkhet for standard. However, when you fuse them together, you have this beautiful marriage of what I consider a very intricate and very competitive budget modern deck, and I'd like to go over it for you. So, at its core, it is a deck that creates tokens. Now, the two cards that it does that came out of Amonkhet recently, and the first is Hepatra. It's a 2/2 for 2 legendary creature, and its first ability is whenever Hepatra, Vizier of Poison, deals combat damage to a player, you may put a -1 counter on target creature. It's good and fine, but the second ability we're more concerned with is whenever you put one or more -1 counters on a creature, create a 1/1 green snake creature token with Death Touch. Now, a couple things to point out. The first is it's one or more, so if you, for example, put -3 on something, you still only get the one token. The second thing to point out is it does not specify whether it's on your creature or your opponent's. So we can go ahead and put counters, negative counters on our opponent's creatures, deal damage to their creatures, use it as removal, and gain tokens on our side of the board, which is a big swing in our favor. If we can remove creatures while creating creatures at the same time, I mean, that's just tremendous value. Oh, people liking stuff on Facebook. Okay, the second card is Nest of Scarabs, which essentially does a very similar thing, except it makes 1/1 black insect creature tokens. One thing that's different is it says create that many 1/1 black insect creature tokens, so this is scalable depending on how many counters we place upon a creature. Same thing, it could be your opponent's or your own creature, and you're still going to get the token generation. Okay, so cool. That's in standard already. However, there's a few big payoff cards and interactions I'd like to go over that we can make a lot of tokens really fast. The first is this card, Dusk Urchins, which I track a lot of the MTG card finance stuff. I look at the movers and shakers on Goldfish, and I check out MTG stocks and all that kind of stuff daily, and this was getting a lot of traction, and this is what originally kind of pulled me to this kind of deck, but I don't think I've seen any quite this well built or this consistent. But essentially what this card does, Dusk Urchin, it's a 4/3 for 3. When it attacks or blocks, you get a -1 counter on it. And when it's put in the graveyard from play, draw a card for each -1 counter that has been placed upon it. So in previous days, this card was as good as you could attack with it. Once you attack 3 times, it accumulated 3 counters. It would essentially go into the graveyard by its own -1 counters, and you would draw 3 cards, which already was decent, but things could block it. It could get removed. There's doesn't really do a whole lot. But one thing that it does in this deck is it not only has that ability to draw cards once it's moved to the graveyard, but every time it attacks, it's also triggering both of these, which it's going to be creating counters for, or not counters, tokens for us. In addition to that, we have a card that came out of Amonkhet, Channeler Initiate, that synergizes fantastic with Dusk Urchins. What it does is when it enters the battlefield, you put 3 -1 counters on target creature you control. and you may remove one of those, add a mana of any color to your mana pool. So if you were in the current Amonkhet, like limited environment, pull this in a booster draft, you would read this and think like, oh, I put the 3 counters on Chandler Initiate. I get a 0/1 for 2 mana that I can continuously move counters off of. I get a bit of ramp. I add, I fix my mana, and then towards the end of it, I end up with a 3/4 body, which is pretty decent. But the way it works in this deck is it can immediately pull or put the 3 counters on Dusk Urchins, which will then move the Dusk Urchins, kill it, move it to the graveyard. You draw 3 cards. You don't have to put the counters on this, so you got a 3/4 body for 2 mana, which is fantastic. And what you're going to do is you're going to trigger this for 1 token, and you're going to trigger this for 3. So granted, that's a fairy tale scenario, but it's not very unlikely, and we have a lot of redundant copies of all of these cards to make this exact scenario happen. You're going to create 4 tokens, draw 3 cards, and end with a 3/4 body for 2 mana if you were to have these 3 in play. Pretty darn good value. Now, that's only one particular synergy that happens in this deck, and there's a lot of them. Another one that, let's go ahead and move on over to here, Noxious Hatchling. I originally started with 1 copy of this card, and I had a bunch of, I've seen a lot of cards people have been throwing in these decks, and I figured, okay, the token generation's cool, it can be disrupted. What's a big payoff card? I was looking, what's that big creature that we can use? And I eventually settled on Noxious Hatchling here, which it's a 6/6 for 4, which is a pretty big body in Modern. But it comes into play with 4 -1/-1 counters on it. And every time you cast a black spell, you remove a counter. Every time you cast a green spell, you remove a counter. So in previous days, the way this could be good is, it's just like over time you're continuously casting spells, and it eventually grows as the game goes on. We're gonna have ways I'll show us in a moment of completely removing those counters right away, and just right off the bat having a big body. But another very, very important ability to point out is this mechanic right here, Wither. So this deals damage to creatures in the form of -1/-1 counters, kind of like Infect. So as this attacks or deals damage, or even chump blocks or anything for that matter, it's going to be triggering both of these to make tokens. Now, as it gets bigger, you remember Nest of Scarabs says you put 1 or more -1/-1 counters, create that many. So considering this is a scalable effect, if down the road, if this were a chump block for 4 or do 4 damage or 3 damage or something, you're going to be creating that many tokens based upon the Wither ability. And also every single time if Hapattra's on the field, it's going to be creating one of those one black Death Touch snakes, and Death Touch is a mighty fine thing to have in Modern, or any format for that matter. Before I go on to how we can move the counters off of this faster, let me go ahead and show you. You're noticing a lot of things that, in the sense of Modern, we're trying to play multiple spells, we're trying to get a combo established, a lot of things for 2 mana, 3 mana, 4 mana. It's not very common. You already saw how Chandler Initiate can create mana if we do leave counters on it, but for this deck I am running 4 Birds of Paradise. There's literally nothing else in the 1-drop spot, and I'm praying that in Hours of Devastation something comes out that has a relevant ability in the 1-drop slot. But for now, we're going to run Birds, which I think is good. I mean, it can maybe chump block a flyer, but anything if on turn 2, if I can get down a Nest of Scarabs or Blowfly Infestation or something like that, it's a fantastic card for us. Another thing, at the 2-drop slot, we have Devoted Druid, which is another mana dork. But what it does is has the second ability where I can put a -1/-1 counter on it to untap it to add even more mana. So the way this can work is I can add 1 green, use it as a ramp, put the counter on it, which will trigger one of my token generators, create, like Hapattra, for example. So say I have this played on turn 3, I play out Hapattra, put a counter on it, creates the token, which untaps it, leaves me more mana, but then I can use for something else. It also has a very cool interaction with Dusk Urchins, but it's not really like something that we're going to be worried about how we're going to be playing this deck. Okay. One other thing I did mention is Blowfly Infestation. So I'm running 2 of these, another enchantment for 3 mana, whichever creature is put in a graveyard from play, if it had a -1, you want to counter on it, put a -1 counter on target creature. So once again, another way to put counters on things. We're getting added value. So this basically makes it, considering most things are going to have counters, majority of the time, to where we can just continuously be making tokens. So it's just resiliency. So for example, like if someone was going to like bolt our devoted druid or something for whatever reason, we can trigger its ability, put a -1 counter on it. It dies. Blowfly trigger infestation triggers, and now I can put a counter on, say, my opponent's creature, which then triggers our token generation. So like they're trying to get rid of one of our creatures, and instead now we have another creature and we're putting negative counters on their creatures. And a -1, I mean, this right here, this could be a big deal. This could take out Delver. This could take out Snapcaster Mage. This could take out a lot of cards in Modern. You know, that -1 is pretty big deal against toughness for the creatures in Modern, or other tokens builds, Lingering Souls tokens, Bitter Blossom tokens. It's going to wipe all that stuff out. Young Pyromancer, all the tokens that creates, it's going to be a good thing. Speaking of removal, the only thing that I'm really going to run main board is 3 Abrupt Decay. We're already in the right colors. I have Fatal Push in the sideboard, which we can maybe bring in as also Dismember, but I think this is going to pretty much do it. It can't be countered. We can get rid of other things, we have a lot of basic lands, so we're going to be resilient to things like Blood Moon and stuff like that, but we can also use this to get rid of, cranial platings and all kinds of neat things. As far as other non-creatures, we have basically 2 play sets of cards that are both commons from Shadowmoor that I'm pretty excited about, and they really make this deck function. Like, you already saw the cool interactions that happen. It gets crazier. I'll go over this one first, and then I'll show you my favorite. We have Fate Transfer. What is going on? Did I just highlight that? Okay, here we go. Fate Transfer. Move all counters from target creature onto another creature. Boom. Instant speed for 2 mana. This is huge. Anytime we actually move a counter from one thing to another, we're creating tokens. Not only that, we can play our Noxious Hatchling and move the 4 counters from Noxious Hatchling onto our opponent's creature. This does not say a creature you control. So 4 damage is huge in Modern. I mean, we can take out a Thought-Knot Seer, we can take out Eidolons, we can take out pretty much anything. Delver of Secrets. Huge. And not only are we using it as removal, it's basically like, for those of you in Standard right now, this is essentially like Grasp of Darkness that's going to make tokens for us at the same time at instant speed. It's just a huge value, and boom, there's a really, really quick way to make our Noxious Hatchling extremely dangerous. Now that Wither ability is extremely dangerous, we can pretty much chump block anything. This thing can straight up take down Reality Smashers. This thing can go toe-to-toe with Tarmogoyfs, all kinds of stuff. Tassigurs, it can rumble with the big boys, Now, one last card before I go to the mana base, which this is probably my favorite value card in the whole deck. It's Scarscale Ritual. It's another common from Shadowmoor. As an additional cost to play Scarscale Ritual, put a -1/-1 counter on creature you control, draw 2 cards. Cantrip. Draw 2 cards for 2 mana. Already fantastic deal. I will make that deal all day, every day. We already have card advantage off Dusk Urchin, but boom, here's another way. 4 full copies is just too good. And the one drawback is negative counter on a creature you control. In a typical sense, that would be a drawback. In our situation, it's enabling tokens. So for 2 mana, draw 2 cards, create 2 tokens. If we have our system in play here, think about that. 2 mana, draw 2 cards, create 2 tokens. Insane. Insane value. It's sorcery speed, but I digress. Okay, quickly let's go over the mana base. It's pretty simple. We have 4 fast lands, Blooming Marsh. We're going to play 2 Hissing Quagmire for creature lands. As far as utility lands, I have 2 Ghost Quarter. We're running 2 Pendlehaven because we are creating a lot of tokens, 1/1 tokens, so the ability to give all of them +1/+2 until end of turn while also be able to create green mana it's pretty cool. And then the rest of this is just going to be just basic forests and swamps. 23 lands total, and then we have all our mana dorks. Like I said, it's kind of a high curve, but we want to be extremely mana efficient, and we don't want to miss a beat, because when we need to hit 4 mana for this, or on turn 5, if I need to be able to drop like a Devoted Druid and also play Blue Infestation, like that's got to happen. We can't miss. All right, so we're going heavy on land here. Quickly, let me just go over to Sideboard. It's pretty straightforward. 2 Grafdigger's Cage against Graveyard Strategies. This is a bit of tech. It's kind of a flavor thing. Obviously, there's other better mana efficient ways to deal with artifacts and enchantments in green, but I just put this in for kind of a flavor sense. Which Wickerburrow Elder enters the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter on it, once again triggering our engine, and I can remove the counter from it to destroy a artifact or enchantment. The only benefit, I would say, compared to some other basic artifact hate and enchantment hate in Modern, is you do end up with a 4/4 body in the end, which is pretty cool. Not a terrible problem to have. And we're able to, I think, generate enough mana to where we can hit this. So I'm running 3 of them. A lot of artifact decks out there. Lantern Control, Affinity. This could take down Bitter Blossoms and Ensnaring Bridges and all kinds of other problematic things. Aether Vial, Chalice of the Void, etc., etc. We're going to have 2 Dismember, which is going to be our removal against basically Eldrazi. That's the main reason I want this. It can take out Reality Smasher and Thought-Knots here, no problem, when typical things like the 3 Fatal Push just aren't going to cut it. And then the 3 Fatal Push is going to go against your heavy aggro decks, where it's just, they're going to, like I said, this deck's going to take a little bit of time to set up. There is an engine we're trying to create. It's kind of combo-y in a way. So sometimes bringing in a 3 Fatal Push against something that's going to be too fast is going to be necessary. We have 3 Collective Brutality, which can act as removal, Hand Disruption. So if we're playing against combo decks, we can go ahead and yank out an instant or sorcery out of their hand, and also gain a bit of life. So this is really good against Burn, Infect, Combo, things of that nature. And then lastly, 2 Maelstrom Pulse. And we have that cool sticking with Almond Cat. We have the artwork from there, which basically just, we can destroy any target permanent and any other permanent with that name. But this is just going to basically be to get rid of the stuff that Abrupt Decay can't. So if we're playing against something that's too high in the curve. So essentially, if we're playing against Tron and we have to destroy a Karn or an Ugin or something like that, Maelstrom Pulse can deal with it. So anyway, this is the deck. Still going to tweak it. I really hope there's some more stuff that comes out of Hours of Devastation with a similar feel that can make this more competitive. I'm getting some games behind it. I think it's pretty cool. And the way it sits right now, I mean, this deck is extremely cheap. Extremely cheap. I think the most expensive card in here is probably Pendlehaven. That's like $10 right now. And this, I mean, you don't even really have to have, like, the rest of this deck. I haven't really totaled it up, but, oh man, this, I don't know, it's super cheap. So if you're looking to get into Modern and look to play something fun, this might be where it's at for you. Let me know what you think. If you have any suggestions or any other deck lists, please send them my way. I'd be happy to play test them, try them out, talk about them. Please subscribe. Please like the video if you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you soon. Goodbye.